Right, part of this talk is very, very difficult, so it may not come off well. Last time we looked at the personality of Elizabeth Taylor. We also looked at the concept of physical beauty and things like that. Now hers is the last one in the order that we're doing of the 16 horoscopes. So that means that we're now beginning I know who's missing. We were supposed to have a new member tonight, but she isn't making it. So we're now entering into a totally new subsection. And when we do that, it's probably a good idea to look at what we're trying to accomplish all together. So we get a big picture. This is an intermediary course in astrology. It is preceded by 2 earlier courses. One, an introductory course that talks about the simple elements, the signs and the houses and the planets and the aspects. I don't know when I'll offer that again, maybe next year, but I think probably the year after. And after that is a beginning course, introductory beginning, in which we took about 3 years and worked on developing tools and technique for getting at a horoscope. We did a lot with keywords, and we did poetic tone images, and then we did several kinds of observation techniques. This class, this intermediary class, if I live long enough, will be succeeded by 2 other classes, which will be an advanced class, which will go very deeply into psychology, and a dynamics class, which talks about prediction and periods of time in life and things like that. This course is called Character Appreciation with Astrology. And the purpose is as much the appreciation of character as it is learning astrology. Because if you don't love people, and if you don't like the creative expressions that comprise the character of people, you have no business studying astrology. My thought on the matter. This course is broken into 3 major subsections. The first one took us a year, and it is looking at the broad generals of a horoscope. We did that by a classical method of test and profile. We did 17 different kinds of tests and produced 17 different kinds of profiles. We looked at them in theory, and then we practiced them on the 6 charts, and then we did a lot of cross-profiling, because in cross-profiling you can bring out all sorts of things that are not immediately apparent on the surface. The second major subsection is the study of a method to approximate the relative astrological strengths of different factors within a horoscope. I don't believe it's possible to weigh one person against another as far as astrological strengths, but within one character you can see what is stronger. We had 2 objectives: to find the relative strength of each aspect with each other astrological aspect, and to find the relative strength of each planet with regard to every other planet in the horoscope. And when we went through that section, it was something like a 25-step program with all kinds of forms and such. You can get to all of that. We then applied that estimation system to the 16 horoscopes, and we did that for 2 reasons. First, we were trying to determine whether the estimation system was accurate, whether the things that came out from the estimation system are what we know the people for. and the kinds of events that were big in their lives. And we scored fairly well on that. And then the second part is to understand character better by knowing relative significance of things. We are now in the middle of, not in the middle, we're not even near the middle yet. We are in the third major subsection, which is to study and synthesize the four major components of character. The personality, which includes the outward form and the vitality and our relationship to the external world and all of those kinds of things. The next part is the emotionality, studying motivation, motives, feelings, passions, drives, desires, all of those kinds of things. The third part is doing the same for studying the mentality, whether somebody is inductive or deductive or a better abstract thinker or an automatic thinker or things like that. And the final part will be to study the individuality, spirituality, and creativity. We've just finished the first subsection. This goes on and on and on, which is to look at the personality. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to introduce ourselves to the basic nature of the emotionality. And we're going to do that in the way that mystics look at the subject. And then for the next 16 meetings after this, we will apply this to the 16 horoscopes and try to understand each of the people emotionally. Now, what we're going to be talking about tonight, this summer sometime, we're going to have a summer school here. We did last year. I think it's between, the 8th to the 12th? The 8th to the 12th, we're going to have a summer school here, and I'm going to talk about this information in much greater detail at this time. What we're trying to do in this class, or with astrology at all, is a very immense thing. It's very difficult to understand a human being in entirety. I think the first time I was asked to work on some of these horoscopes, my feeling was that this could just as well be a blank sheet of paper, because I really didn't know what a human being was. To say nothing of all the astrology you have to know, but to understand what makes people tick and why things happen and what is a human life all about, that's a very big order. And then to have a horoscope with all kinds of symbolic information on it, it doubles the problem, because you not only don't understand human beings, you don't understand astrology. Even what we're doing in this class, it's going to take us about 5 or 6 years totally to get through this. Even that is pretty sketchy. I can't say that I really know totally what a human being is. And the same is true of astrology. There are a lot of books and authorities on astrology which, when you check them, really don't seem to be getting at human nature astrologically. So, without a very large consciousness to be able to grasp it all, and without an intuition, this is very, very difficult. So if we try to say, what is a human being, different people have different ways of approaching this. Materialists, for example, think that a human is the human body, and that the human experience is composed of sensible matter and the interactions of sensible matter. That if we have an emotion, like we're going to discuss this evening, that emotion is a consequence of chemistry, and that the fact of a feeling as a fact in itself never dawns on materialists. I personally prefer the approach to understanding the human being that the mystery schools offer. I like it because it coincides with my own experience. And moreover, it has a lot of intuitive value to it. The intuition is lit up with it a lot. Now, mysticism doesn't deny the statements of material science, with all the complex chemistry and biochemistry and all of that. It just says that when we feel energetic, that feeling of energeticness is not due to chemical reactions in the body, though those chemical reactions in the body may accompany the feeling of energetic. What mystics actually claim is that there is a realm that interpenetrates this realm that is actually a rarer form of physical matter, something that goes beyond solids, liquids, and gases. They claim that we can relate to this realm of energy because we have a vehicle or a body that's composed of energy. And all of our experience of life and of growth and of the ability to move and all of those things are a consequence of that energetic, vital, etheric body. Now, that doesn't invalidate the fact that there are hormones concomitant with growth, or that there are hormones that are concomitant with any kind of energy sensation. It just says that things are happening in parallel in two different realms. So everything it says about this is that we experience vitality in a realm of vitality. Now, the findings of mysticism don't really stop there. Mysticism says a lot more about the etheric subdivision of the physical world, but that's not germane to what we're talking about, so we'll just skip that altogether. What is germane and relevant are the states of being beyond the physical and etheric. For example, and this is the example we want to get at, when we emote, there are changes in the physical body, and there are changes in the etheric body, but these experiences are more effects than they are causes. The things that happen in our brain are things that are effects rather than causes. The real cause of emotion, according to mystics, is from a realm that transcends and interactively interpenetrates with the physical and etheric realm. In that realm is a realm of emotions, and passions, and desires, and all of those kinds of things. Just like the physical realm is made up of all kinds of different physical substances, all kinds of different chemicals, the emotional realm is made up of all kinds of emotions. Thus, if we have feelings about something, like a sunset or something like that, those feelings are in the world of feeling. Though there may very well be effects in the physical body. A person may feel more peaceful or something like that from watching the sunset. Basically, then, mysticism says we are more than just physical forms. We are beings that have physical forms, and we have forms that relate us to the world of vitality and we have bodies or vehicles that relate us to the world of feelings and emotions. What mysticism says also is that we can experience feelings and emotions independent of the physical etheric stimuli. We can even experience them independent of the physical and etheric bodies. That is, we can, as we do in death, remove ourselves from the physical world and the world of energy, and we find out that we still experience feelings and emotions. Now, mystics who are trained investigators find that the realm of feelings and emotions and desires is of a completely different stuff than the matter that we know. And it's so different that it has different laws, different principles, and different ways of going about things. We're going to talk about some of them tonight, but very little, enough so that we can get to what we need to get to. For example, the difference is such that everything in the physical and etheric realm are subject to the principle of gravity, which is a kind of an attraction between physical objects. Even light is subject to gravity. Eddington's experiment, which proved Einstein's notion about light bending with gravity, proves that. Now, there is a rationale to desire, but the rationale to desire is not the same as the rationale to physics and chemistry. And it isn't the same as the rationale that is behind growth and other so-called biological activities. It is this realm of emotionality and the rationale behind it that we're going to explore so that we can work astrologically and so that we can test our understanding through astrology, because astrology should give us a way to test any intuitive conclusion we may come to. It is a fact that the desire world is much more related to astrology than the physical etheric realm is. This is so much so that some investigators call the desire world the astral plane or the astral realm or something like that. And that's right where we want to get. There are two reasons why it is called the astral realm. First, it is when it appears to the inner eye, it is glowing with light, and it's a scintillating, twinkling kind of light that is very similar, but in a toned down way, to looking at stars in this world. So when you see someone in their emotional constitution, you're seeing someone in a way that it reminds you of looking at stars. Of course, when you do that, you're not doing that with your eyes or with any other kind of sense perception, because the physical world does not relate to the desire world. One is seeing with the eye of feeling. And psychologically, you can see that that has all kinds of problems. The most common being the problem of projection. Because if you're looking through your own emotionality and your own emotionality is screwed up, you project that into what you're seeing in the emotionality of another person. This is why mysticism is so very keen on the idea of purification. And by purification, that's way too big to go into, I guess. But it's not what most people normally consider purification to be. Now, we all have in our auras, which are composed of desires, we have places where things are more developed, they're more sensitive, they are centers where we can, so to speak, see. But they still have to be developed, and they have to be developed by getting inside of and knowing and living within emotions. The second reason why it's called the astrological realm or the astral realm is because the astrological forces are highly, highly active. If you want an image, it's something like there is an enormous, depthless reservoir of emotion. And that this emotion is experienced as light with various different emotional color tones to it. For example, if one feels the desire to assert energy, that is seen in the desire world in the same way. When you see someone who's asserting energy, you see that feeling with a sensation that is very much like when you see something red in this realm. We don't want to try to superimpose this realm on the other, because that doesn't work, because that's trying to put put something greater into something lesser, and it just doesn't work. But the thing is that you're experiencing feelings, and those feelings are like what it feels like to experience color in this world. In the realm of emotion and desire and feeling, there is this big reservoir of color feeling. There are long-term moods, such as there are prevalent attitudes that run throughout society for thousands, if not millions of years. But then there are all kinds of changes that are constantly happening. And what is the music of the spheres in another realm, the mental realm, is a music of color, or a music of feeling that appears as color in the desire world. So in general, each planet, the spiritual being that is associated with each planet, is recycling desire material and pouring it into the desire world, renewed and purified by its own essence. So each of the planets has its own particular color. But depending on the sign that it's in and the interactions that it's undergoing, it puts out that kind of a color. So this is something that's constantly renewed, even though there's an ever-shifting trend or levels of trends from small to very long periods of time. There is also something that's fresh and constantly changing from moment to moment. Every sentient human being, that is, every human being that can feel, emote, or desire something, responds accordingly. Now, like in some lower species of animals, only reproduction and the desire to continually live, such as like getting food or something like that, are the only desires that they have. So they're subject to only the most primitive urges and the most gross and obvious emotions. Some of us human beings are like that. So they're oblivious to all of the other things. But that's That's something we're going to come back to in a little while. Now, modern mystics do not name things as much by appearance or description as they do by function. So it's an older term that tries to describe the desire world that calls it the astral world. Modern mystics call that realm the desire world because that is the function that it has. That's the function that it has currently for human beings at this stage of evolution. We'll come to other things later on. I was going to cram a lot in the last 5 minutes. So without a desire body and without a desire world, everything would be just vegetative beings. There would be a physical form, and that physical form could live and grow and could experience vitality and energy, but it would have no motivation to go anywhere or to do anything. In human beings, the chief purpose of the desire world at this time in evolution is motivation. In human beings at this time of evolution, the chief purpose for our work in the desire world is motivation. Desire motivates. Whether we are motivated by desire to seek something or to flee something, it is the desire that motivates us. Now, according to mystics, our dense bodies, our desire bodies, commenced evolution in a great period called the moon period. But the cosmos was so different at that time, it was no more dense than an electromagnetic field, if you want to call an etheric field an electromagnetic field. The world was no more dense than magnetism. That period is called the moon period. There have actually been 3 such periods before the current Earth period. They are a Saturn period, during which the cosmos was no more dense than a concrete thought. And we were mineral like human beings. So we were thought substance mineral like beings. This was succeeded by a sun period, which is when the evolving what was to become the solar system took on light. And the cosmos at that time was no more dense than a desire. And we were plant-like human beings at that time. And then there was the moon period when the cosmos was no more dense than the ethers or than what we would call a magnetic field. Now these names, these planetary names for the periods of time, have much more to do with planetary character than with those heavenly bodies out there. In fact, the planetary character was there millions and millions of years before those heavenly bodies were out there. Those heavenly bodies are concretions of planetary character that concretize them in order to objectively experience the external world from a given point of view.
The ideas precipitated from planets then?
The ideas, yes. Ideas were combined. The qualities in those ideas were combined, and thoughts were produced. And from the thoughts, emotional natures, and finally condensed right into something physical. This is not a radically new idea. I'm sure the old timers have it somewhere.
Eternally divine new about it.
The Greeks knew about it. For example, the Porphyry, the Neoplatonist philosopher who wrote a lot about astrology, said there was a zodiac even before there were stars, meaning to say that dodecahedral idea of 12 surrounding a 13th, which is the basis of anything that develops in three-dimensional space, that 12 around the 13th was there before the physical world existed. All right. What we're trying to say in this, and that what is important to us in this, is that the fundamental tone and basis of the desire world and the desire body is the moon. That's exceedingly important to astrology. Even simple astrological keywords can help us to understand that. For example, one of the most basic of all keywords that relate to the moon is feeling. If you want to understand the quotient of feeling that the individual has, or if you want to experience it, you focus on the moon. And inwardly, you will get a sense of how feelingful the individual is. Everything in the desire world, or the desire body, has feeling and feelings. It is the way emotion is perceived, is through feeling. But in the world of mysticism, the word feeling has a specialized, specific meaning that is very exact compared to the broad general meaning of the word feeling. Mystics claim that any experience at all in the desire world begins or enters with feeling. Now, in a very specific way, mystics claim that of all the different feelings that there are two central feelings. And all of the experience of all of the other feelings depends on the most basic feelings in the desire world. And those two polar feelings are the feeling of interest and the feeling of indifference. Now this brings up all kinds of concepts that are not common to everyday consciousness. We tend to think of indifference as a lack of feeling. But that might be because of our weak, infantile consciousness of the desire world. One way to try to understand what is meant is to put it on the astrological mandala. The mandala represents the universe and everything in it. The moon in the cosmic mandala would be in Cancer. It would be in its home position. It would be most itself then. And in Cancer, it would be opposite to Capricorn. The moon feels things. The moon is interested in things. It's interested in a participatory way. The moon is like a great mother that's interested in caring about things. Every kind of thing. This interest is best described with one word with some qualification. and that is curiosity. Not mental curiosity, but more like the curiosity of a dog that has been let loose after it has been chained up for weeks and weeks. The dog bounds here, and it bounds there, and it bounds there. It's curious. It's interested in everything around it. So the lunar influence would be at a very low level if it were paired with Capricorn. Capricorn is a hard, cold, crystalline, saturnine feeling, which is something like what indifference is like. Shakespeare, who knew a lot about human character, when he describes Saturnian people, he always uses the word, they are cold people. Another way to try to get at the concept of indifference as an active feeling or as a positive feeling is a concept that is available from physics. And that is a concept of antimatter. And antimatter is an active antithesis of matter, meaning to say that if this music stand were to meet with antimatter, it would be disintegrated right away. The antimatter would undo the matter. And so what we're saying is if one is intentionally disinterested, if one is intentionally indifferent, it zeroes out the emotion and desire as a possible source for a feelingful response. So there is a feeling that would itself undo emotion, just as there is a feeling that would be interested. So in order to do anything in the realm of desire, you first have to be interested in it. You can't desire something, or you can't desire to flee something unless you're interested in it in the first place. If you're not interested, you're not going to know about it, and it's going to be gone. You know, it's not even going to be in your horizon. Like the dog is not aware. You know, if there's conversation going on about abstract mathematics, that dog isn't aware of that. He doesn't have any interest in that. Little children walk around, they're only about this high, and they're interested in things at a lower level than people who are grown up and looking at things at a different level. Now, the desire world is very object-oriented. You're going to hear that several times tonight. The desire world is very object-oriented. One is interested in or desirous about something. And that thing is the object of interest. Following this line of reasoning, the feeling of indifference would be a diffusive feeling, one that takes away from specificity and broadens something out to the point that it's completely gone. On the mandala, that would be consistent with the way the horoscope is set up, because the other two signs that are furthest away from Cancer are Sagittarius and Aquarius. And they are the most diffuse and the most abstract and the most removed. In fact, the scientific notion of being scientifically indifferent is most associated with Gemini and Aquarius, the Aries signs. But of course, the Aquarian scientist who is coolly indifferent is obviously the perfect example of that. It's a very dangerous thing to practice indifference. Because if you do, you can wind up without any emotion, without any motivation. So this is a very different statement from some spiritual schools that say to kill out desire. Not at all a wise idea. Because you start killing out desire, and pretty soon you're living in a gray world with no colors whatsoever. And there's no possibility of evolution through the experiences that we gain in this plane, because there's nothing to motivate us to do anything. Sometimes, if you have a very dangerous desire that you cannot control and that threatens to destroy you completely, then you can practice indifference to it intentionally, but be careful about walking down that road. So, to review from everything that we've said, that the moon is fundamental to understanding and reading the basic feelings, the basic emotionality, the basic desires. All of the primitive, even the most things that we call instincts, are to a large extent ruled by the moon. The moon, because of its impressionability, and because it is made up of the pure and centralmost and rarest feeling, the feeling of interest, is interested in everything to some degree. And the moon is excited by everything to some degree. Thus, the moon fosters all activity, mothers it, or fosters it, or brings it into existence, because it's interested, and in its interest it cares, and it does something. And that mothering instinct is not something that we just associate with one gender. It's a universal principle, and to the degree that one has a strong moon, to that degree one will foster or mother something. Doesn't make any difference what it is. I'm sure you've all by now seen those pictures on the internet of that baby hippo that was carried out into the sea and then back to land, and its whole background was gone to it. And so it was adopted, or it adopted a turtle, a huge big sea turtle, as its mother, and the sea turtle acts as its mother. And there is there's a sympathy where they interact with each other in a family-like way. Now this is only the beginning, because things don't just begin with action, with feeling. The desire world is such that one cannot feel something without responding. And that response is action, or activating. And one acts to the degree that one is interested. If you're really interested in something, you act really quickly about it. You act with great force, if that's what's called for. Now, things get peculiar again with mysticism until you understand them, and then it seems perfectly normal. Mystics find that if a person is interested in something, they initiate an action by that very interest. But the action is a motive force. It motivates beings to action. And that motive force has two qualities. In fact, they're even called two different forces. One is the force of attraction, and one is the force of repulsion. Now this is pretty simple. Either our interest in objects attracts us to them, or it repels us from them. Sometimes it works wrong, but it's really, really simple.
Question.
Yes.
So what you're saying, or from what I'm getting from this, is that in the desire world, you're basically dealing with polarities and the extent or the degree to which they are influenced by different conditions.
Yes. We're going to come to that. It'll become clearer. We've got a lot of detailed stuff to go through yet. What's not so obvious about this is what kind of attitude attracts us and what kind of attitude causes us to be repelled. This is where things really get interesting. Mystics claim that the attitude of self-assertion is what is behind repulsion. And mystics also claim that the attitude of expressed love is the attitude that is behind attraction. If we make an image, we might be able to understand it a little better. In fact, I'm going to make a wrong image intentionally on first. Suppose in the physical world, you have a human being with a normal physical body, who's a cowboy. And this dense physical body is interpenetrated by a vehicle of energy that radiates out in it and allows it to live. In the auric desire body, it is as though now this is abstract, it's not meant to be literal. It is as though there are constantly vectors that are radiating things out. Simultaneously, it is as though there are vectors that are constantly coming in to our center of consciousness. But the fact of the matter is that the outgoing vectors and the incoming vectors, remember, this is just an image now. It's not the full reality. The idea is what counts. The outgoing and the incoming vectors are one and the same. So that at any given time, there are things coming out from us and there are things coming into us. It is based quite similar to the idea of action and reaction. There is no action without an equal and opposite reaction. You notice that most when there is no resistance. For example, if you step into a boat, since the boat has little resistance when you step, the boat goes one way, opposite the way that you're stepping. All right. So all we're saying in this is that we have, so to speak, from the center of our being, we radiate things out in terms of desire and we draw things in. Now, the claim is that when we assert ourselves in the inward flow, we are repulsive in the outward flow. That is, if we assert ourselves and rather than just letting things come in, but we pull them in, then what goes in the outer direction is repulsion. Perfect example is a dog with a food bowl. That dog pulls that food bowl to itself and it growls. And that growling, as it's drawing to itself, is repulsive. It repels anything else that wants to come in and glom onto the food. That's a very perfect example to show the principle. On the other hand, if one is conscious of giving love on the outgoing wave, the consequence is that we attract things to us. That's pretty obvious. You know, nobody wants to be around somebody who's always selfishly taking things to themselves, but somebody's loving and giving, and they really care about you, and they're outpouring to you. You want to be around somebody like that. So, what the claims of mysticism actually make sense. They're marvelously true. Now comes the interesting part in all of this. I can show you astrology textbooks from several different sources that were written about 100 years ago when keyword astrology was just beginning. The same kind of keyword astrology that we spent so many years on. I think it was 2 or 3 years that we worked on it. Yeah, 3 years. In those books, self-assertion is the fundamental keyword for the sign Aries. And repulsion is a fundamental keyword for the sign Scorpio. Thus, both Mars in Scorpio, both Aries and Scorpio are ruled by Mars. So what we can say from this is that what are called the lower regions of the desire world, where the force of repulsion is really strong, those realms are ruled by Mars. And Mars rules repulsion. Now, we're not talking astrology quite exactly in the normal way of looking at astrology. What we're saying is that the strength of Mars in a horoscope, irrespective of its aspects and everything else, the strength of Mars indicates the degree of active repulsion within the desire nature or within the emotional nature of this individual. Now, if you look in the same astrology textbooks, one of the key words for a specific love, we talked a lot about it last time when we talked about Elizabeth Taylor, where you love a specific person and you match yourself up with that person. One of the key words for that is specific love. You're giving love to somebody to whom you have committed yourself. That's one of the key words for Libra. Always has been. One of the key words, one of the most basic key words for Taurus is attraction. And both Libra and Taurus are ruled by Venus. So then what we're saying is that attraction, which is active throughout the desire world, because even thieves are attracted to each other, is ruled by Venus. However, attraction is more predominant in the higher 4 or 5 levels or realms, sub-realms of the desire world. So we can say that all of the higher desires are ruled roughly by Venus, which is the attractive force. And that, again, this is not standard astrology, but to the degree that one has an intense Venus, to that degree is the person attractive. Now, this is interesting because for centuries, Mars and Venus have always been considered the planets of love and passion. We have all that artwork going back to the Renaissance. Who was it that had the picture of Mars and Venus? Sandro Botticelli had that, where she's got the look of the cat that swallowed the canary, and he's falling asleep in the aftermath of everything that has just gone on. It's a perfect statement of Mars and Venus in that kind of a sense. So, what we're saying in all of this is that affection and anger, or temper might be a better word, are the basic attractives and repulsives. So what we're saying is that in relation to the basic emotionality, the basic desirability, or the basic feelability that is indicated by the moon, that there is a basic force for all attraction, and in the overall sense, that is ruled by Venus, while the basic force for repulsion overall is ruled by Mars. Now this is something pretty remarkable, and it's something extremely useful when you're trying to understand and appreciate character. Because the emotionality, most people won't even look at the emotionality astrologically. But if you want to appreciate the emotionality of someone, if you understand these things, you can get at things that you don't normally get at. Now the astrology of this is fascinating in another way. Aries and Libra are cardinal signs. They're active signs. Whereas Scorpio and Taurus are fixed signs. Things just sort of sit there. There's the residual effect to the fixed signs. So what we're saying is that the active and proactive attitudes that result in consequences are ruled by the active signs, while the consequences and the residual effect of those consequences are ruled by fixed signs, which is what astrology has said all along. So what we're saying is then that action has lasting consequences. It produces atmospheres, long-term atmospheres of attitude. This is just what we would expect in the desire world, because the whole desire world is basically action. It's alive with action all the time. To be in the desire world, especially to be in the desire world free of any connection to the physical world, is like being in a total stimulus, a total excitement all the time. And everything is exciting you and stimulating you. It's an overwhelming kind of experience. A person has to be prepared psychologically quite a bit to be able to handle this. Now the astrology of this goes even further. We've said it before, and this is one of the repeats. The desire world is a very object-oriented world. We are interested or indifferent to objects or to objectives. The objects don't have to be physical objects, but at our state of evolution and in our evolutionary conditions, they usually are. I don't get as desirous, for example, of the feelings in a song as I do get desirous of a pretty woman who is an object in the physical world. It's for right now, it's reasonably all right to think that way. This brings us to a classical philosophical topic, and that is the object-subject relationship. The things we are interested in, the objects or the objectives, are external, even if they're in an inner world, because the desire world is called an inner world because we perceive it inside of ourselves, but there are still objects in the desire world outside of us, even in that inner world. The way we're looking at things is that the being that is interested in objects or objective is also a thing or an object. Thus we have two objects. In our drawing, which is not right, and in our experience, one object is internal and one is external. Now classically, because at this stage of evolution, we are trying to be outward and to creatively take things from within us and externalize them outwardly, because outward things have the outward object as a more definite object. It is a more objective thing. That chair is something that we can, even though it's not a very desirable chair, it is something that is constant. My attitude in me, in the subject about that chair is very different. I actually stole that chair. Many, many years ago, I stole it from the art department. And I had to make all kinds of amends for that. My ex-wife is great about that. I have a stapler here that she gave to me that she stole from the University of Minnesota. But when she got on the spiritual path, she went back over her life, and anything that she ever stole from anyone, she made retribution. That, I think, is a marvelous thing. So I have a paid-for stapler that's from the University of Minnesota. All right.
The art department's still looking for that chair.
In the way that we're looking at things, in being interested in objects or objectives, we have these two objects. And the external one we call the object because it's supposed to be objective. The internal one is what we call self, with a small s. Thus, the subject is equally objective. It is equally an object, but it is subjective in its outlook because at this stage we have all kinds of subjective feelings about it. So if we look at this in the light of what we've been talking about, repulsive actions are self-centered actions, are selfish actions, because we are intentionally taking the object of desire and forcibly trying to bring it to the subject of desire. And the result is that it pushes things away. So this says then that basically repulsive desires are selfish acts. Now we don't have a name for that object that is outside like we have the name self for the internal object, but nonetheless we can still talk about it. From the descriptions of the different regions of desire that we have, the desires that have the greatest attractive ability, which include things like altruism and philanthropy, are things that tend to be more impersonal. So you might say then that to be truly attractive is to be impersonal. And to love impersonally, irrespective of the character of the person that you're loving. And so we can see then that the object of attractive desires is or could be anyone, or it is or could be everyone. Now we do project our love on individuals, but it's done without favoritism. Those are the highest and most attractive kinds of desires. Again, you want to be with somebody that loves you because they love you and not because of some special need or something of that nature.
Question.
Yes.
If if the best love or whatever, as I just heard you say, or think I heard you say, is impersonal, how does that relate to indifference?
Impersonal is different than indifference. Indifference means you actively don't care about something. You don't even put the thing in attention. You're just indifferent to it altogether. In the case of impersonality, you're interested in something, you love it, but it's impersonal. The person, again, is the subjective thing. See, when something is personal and taken personally and subjectively, it's a selfish thing. You know, these people that go into all of their hysteria about this happening and such, these are people that are subjectively and personally oriented. They take everything personal. You can't tell them anything without them taking it personal, and you don't want to be around people like that. That's highly repulsive. But if you love something because it needs love and impersonally give love to it, you're going to be successful. Okay. It's a good point to bring up because the words, the words in this world are not the best kind of words that we have. So, we see attractive acts are impersonally giving and they're unselfish. Thus, if someone is selfish and subjective, they produce repulsive acts, and we can say of those repulsive acts that they are Saturnian in nature. They are not diffusive. They are focusing, and are focusing on the subject, on the self, and as we know, selfishness is one of the Saturnine keywords. The unselfish, or the attractive acts, which are directed to a larger thing in general, or to a specific representative of a larger thing in general, are more Jupiterian. So as a consequence, we have secondary rulerships that are based not so much on the action of attraction or repulsion, but on the relationship to the object or the subject. And this gives us an enormous amount of information. Now, because Saturn and Jupiter, as we're using them in this use, do not rule the basic forces, and the basic forces that are ruled by Mars and Venus are all important, Saturn and Jupiter are not as fundamentally or basically important in all horoscopes as Mars and Venus are in determining the desired nature. They indicate the objective rather than the action. And the action is the thing that's more important. So for this reason, Saturn and Jupiter are considered minor significators in the desired nature. Now comes the hard part, where all the work has to come in. This doesn't mean that Saturn and Jupiter cannot be astrologically strong planets. And if they are, that they won't be strong factors in the desired nature. It takes much more for that to happen, but they can be more important in the desired nature than Mars and Venus because of their astrological strength. It means only that the Saturn and Jupiter relate to objectives in the objective-subjective duality. And objects do have importance in the desire world. The secondary nature of Saturn and Jupiter in the desire nature or in the emotionality is an intangible thing. It's almost impossible to quantify. But if we hold it in our consciousness as a factor, we should be able to intuitively synthesize something about it. So that when we go through the 16 charts, we're going to work with Saturn and Jupiter, but it's going to be very much of an intangible. So, in the course of examining these 16 horoscopes, we will probably be encountering all kinds of combinations of strengths between Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and the Moon. Now let's look at some very obvious things. For example, if the primary emotionality significators, Moon, Mars, and Venus, are weak, and they're in sterile placements like in air signs or something like that, the native is going to have a low desire quotient. These planets may be in aspects that are malefic or benefic, but even if they are in malefic or benefic aspects, the person will not be highly motivated to either virtue or vice. There are people that we see in the world that are inclined toward criminal or activities of vice, but they don't have the wherewithal or the gumption to go out and do it. In the same way, there are people who would love if they had the opportunity to love, but they just don't bring themselves, or they don't bring the motivation to bear on it so that they actually do love. Some people would even say that a strong or a weak moon of itself is necessary to being a highly emotional, excitable, or desirable person. Just for a second, let's cut down some of the variables and give some examples. We'll cut down the variables by saying the moon is constant, of average or slightly more than average strength. Then if Mars is strong and Venus is weak, the individual will be repulsive or offensive no matter what talents that person has. There are a lot of people that are really talented people, but because they've got that Mars nature, they're offensive. You don't want to be around them. Similarly, we can find people who are attractive who are very low-key, and perhaps even flawed in their presentation or in their talents. They're attractive because they love and because they care. These are very valuable people in the world. Now let's look at some other, just a sample case. Suppose, for example, that we have somebody with a strong Venus, but a weak Mars, and suppose further that the individual has a weak Jupiter and a strong Saturn. And there may even be a benefic aspect between Saturn and Venus. This is someone whose ways and actions are more attractive than repulsive. But it's also someone whose motive and whose ends are more selfish than unselfish. So this might be somebody who gives love and gives out a lot of love, but does it for selfish ends. I'm sure we've all met those kinds of people. And it's someone who knows how to give love in a measured way. Now these are just one or two very simple possible combinations for these 5 planets, which are the most important to the emotionality. It might be a good exercise if you want to, in your spare time, take all 5 and put them all together in different kinds of combinations and see what kind of basic emotionality you get from that. You can do that at the times when you're not reading biographies. Which is another assignment that everybody's had.
So do you mean that it doesn't matter what the aspects or that
That's right.
planets have? I mean,
the aspects give something to it, but you can have a very fine aspect between Saturn and Venus that's weak. But if Venus is strong and Saturn is weak, the person will still be attractive, and this person will be attractive, and their measurement of love will be on the self.
But let's say a person has strong positive Saturn aspects, they'd still be repulsive?
If they have a strong Mars, they would still be repulsive, irrespective of what the Saturn is. The Saturn would indicate that the repulsion would be because of gross selfishness. And they might even be very skilled at it. There are some people that are very skilled at cracking safes, or in psychologically doping out how they can dupe people over the phone or something like that.
So even let's say you have a very strong Mars, but they're all like trines and such, that still would be kind of strange.
Yes. There would. I'm not trying to negate and say that the trines wouldn't be there and that they wouldn't be effective and that they wouldn't work out. All I'm saying is that if there is a strong Mars, that there is something basically in the self-assertion of that strong Mars that is repulsive. If you're like me and are interested in the March Madness, they call it competitive spirit. And there is something between very talented people who are very good human beings that they have this high level of competitive assertion that they're repulsive to each other. Because there are opposites. That doesn't mean that they hate each other like enemies. If Saturn is involved, they might very well hate each other like Dennis Rodman from the deck. All right, you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
No, we're going to look at all of these. I'm talking big here, so we're going to have a lot of work for me to keep up to what I'm saying now. But we're going to try and look at all of these factors, and we're going to try and see how it works out in these people's lives. That's the proof of the pudding, is how it works and what we can determine and what we can see as a result of what we're trying to apply. All right. We've been joking, or I've been joking about doing these kinds of exercises and reading biographies, and in a way, I'm not joking, because if anyone hopes to evolve superphysical faculties, or if anyone hopes to evolve the ability to look deep into someone else's soul, it means a lot of work. Because through the work and through the experiences where you learn how to do it. Now, there's one factor that we don't have time to go into now that is important, but it complicates things. And that fact is gender. The auric desire body is not gender, but the emotional nature, when it works through the etheric and physical bodies, is affected by the polarities of the dense and vital bodies. So there is going to be an effect. And we know that the Moon and Venus have a stronger effect in females' charts, whereas Mars and the Sun have a stronger effect in males' charts. When we look at this and we see the experience of desire, the experience of desire on the plane of desire is no different than from male to female. But when it goes through the physical etheric bodies and everything that we have built into them by programming and education and everything else, they appear or they are experienced very differently. Now, we're going to intentionally address this issue later on when it's more convenient, when we're looking at males and females charts. Now we've got several things on the table here that we have to clear up. Oh my goodness, this is lasting long. I thought it was going to be a 45-minute one. Lucky I didn't say anything. I would have embarrassed myself all over again.
You know it's going to be difficult.
Well, yeah, it's a hard part. A lot of people have very limited emotional and desire lives. Many of them are not much different than a clam. They have few desires. Usually they have the most base desires like anger and hatred and sex, and some people do not get excitement except if they go to a horror movie or go on the roller coaster or something like that. Now, in the horoscope of such an individual, there might be all sorts of other emotions available, but they might never be accessed in life. This is a reason why observation is so important to determine what is feasible in a character and what isn't feasible. Some people just have not evolved the capacity to feel altruism or to be in touch with the feelings that we experience through art. We're trying to get at now wider and more subtle feelings and emotions. A few minutes ago when we were speaking about Jupiter and the higher emotions, we mentioned that they were more general emotions, feelings, and desires. We spoke about the impersonal nature, such that we could altruistically love just about anyone. In fact, we should altruistically be able to love anyone. People who have had clairvoyant experiences have told me that when the lights go on and you have the painter's eye, you look at everyone and everyone looks beautiful. And that's where you're getting near to that higher attractive kind of love. The more that we go in the direction of higher desires, the more we encounter general and subtle things. In fact, it seems to me that it is a general cosmological principle that the more subtle a force is, the more powerful it is. Steam is more powerful than brute force, even though steam is subtle enough to be invisible. Desire is more powerful than steam, and thought is more powerful than desire, and it continues that way so that by the time we get to a level of the spirit where everything is almost infinitely subtle and transcendent, there are powers that are imponderable in their greatness. At the same time that we go to the more subtle, the more we are proceeding in the direction of the more universal, especially when we get to spiritual things. Things in the spiritual, transcendental realms are universal, and they are exceedingly subtle. From this, we can see a problem in relation to desire and motivation, and to dealing with that problem astrologically. Desire, we have said repeatedly, is object-oriented. But as we proceed in the direction of attraction, we encounter greater and greater subtlety, which is a problem in itself, and we encounter more and more universality. Now, it should be really obvious that it's easy to be object-oriented about a dish of dog food. It's much more difficult to be object-oriented about general philanthropy. That's a huge thing. we can altruistically love one human, but loving all of humanity as an emotional experience is a much more difficult thing, a much harder thing to do. There are people that say art for art's sake. For some people that might not be possible. Now, much earlier in the evening, we said that the desire world has two functions. The one that is important and dominant now is motivation through desire. The other is the experience of feeling itself. In the same way that there is something about a form that is inherently itself and valuable as itself, there is something inherently valuable in each emotional fact that one can feel. Now, when we listen to music, we experience all sorts of feelings and emotions. And many of them are edifying. And some of them are enough to make us happy in themselves. The claim is that at some time in the future, we will live in the desire world in a way analogous to the way that we live in the dense physical world now. We will relate to emotions through feeling, analogously to the way that we relate to shapes and textures and stuff and all the qualities of this world. Also, much earlier, we had this picture. Astrology, like music or painting, gives us access to that kind of experience right now. By looking at a horoscope, we should be able to feel what we feel when we listen to music or when we look at a piece of art. Also, much earlier, we used an image of this almost infinite pool of feeling-toned color. At that time, we said that each planet welled its emotion as color into the pool in greater or lesser volume and intensity. We also said that the planetary emotion colors, like Mars is a basic red, that those colors were modified by the sign that each planet is focusing. From the viewpoint of the desire world, the signs are like universal fields of emotion or of emotional attitudes, and they are enormous in their complexity. When emotions are renewed in this process where they well in and out through the planets, in the desire world, they are, in the renewing process, they are rendered macrocosmic. That is to say that there's a perfect cosmic recycling of desire. In their macrocosmic state, they are returned to a native state. They all have character. There's a character to Venus and a character to Mars. But the character in the macrocosmic state is more classical, or it is more archetypal. And it's not a personalized idiosyncrasy. In our previous look at this picture, it is like unmixing the paints and returning them to the tube to have them doled out again in greater or lesser amounts. everything is returned to its pure state. The paints have a general macrocosmic quality. The specific beings, like you and I and the angels and archangels and the animals that experience desire, we take those macrocosmic or those classic desires and we mix them the way a painter mixes paints. This is the relationship between the macrocosm and the microcosm. The microcosm uses personal, subjective, creative works which are provided in the classical state by the macrocosm. What we're trying to get at here is that specific beings with specific desire bodies may blend things in a way that is very idiosyncratic, very subjective, and not at all classical. We're going to see a lot of that as we look at these 16 horoscopes. But Mars and the Moon do not have these petty personal emotional expressions, even though Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey has Ares and Athena doing all kinds of very personal things. In spirit, we as human beings belong to the macrocosm. In our phenomenal existence, we belong to the microcosm. So we partake of both at the same time. Thus, we can, and probably it is wisest to do so, we can love one individual and through that individual see the altruistic whole and love all of humanity for the humanity in that one individual. That is what that is when we're using the abilities that are available to us to the very best. However, at this stage of evolution and with the nature of the desire world as it is right now, it's very difficult for us to treat universals as objects and to be object-oriented with them. We're trying to get at several things here. First, Moon, Mars, Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter are important to how the dynamics of desire expression work. We're not talking about the individual desires. We're talking about how the dynamics of desire expression work. Nonetheless, feeling, which is the second major function of the desire world, covers the entire emotional spectrum. And thus, all of the astrological elements, even such things as houses and aspects, contribute to the emotional nature or our expression. This is what makes astrology so difficult, because we have to determine as well as we can how and how much the astrological elements that are not of these 5 planets fit into the chart, or how do these 5 planets fit into the overall emotional spectrum, irrespective of their place in the dynamics of how it all works. Another thing that we're trying to determine is how and how well one is relating to specific emotions as well as general emotions. That is to say, in an almost facetious example, is the red of my blood a good expression of the archetypal red of Mars? It isn't quite facetious, because in various degrees of blood poisoning and studying the blood, you can almost tell the nature of activity in the body by the color of the blood.
I have another question.
Yes.
What if you have like planets in, say, a lot of planets in Cancer? Would that kind of add to the...
Yes. Yes.
The strength of the
Well,
moon.
we're talking about this in the second objective, where we're trying to see where the person fits in the whole emotional spectrum, what they feel and what excites them. Yes, that certainly fits it.
But I guess it's more important the strength of the moon as opposed to the number
Well,
of planets.
you have to
in Cancer.
synthesize all those things together. We'll get plenty of examples of doing that, because there are always human beings, because we have so many polarities in us. We're just filled with all kinds of contradictions, and the resolution of those contradictions overall or at any level of our expression is what we're trying to get at with astrology. It's not an easy business at all. At this time in evolution, we have to have specific motive desires, or we don't do anything. At this time in evolution, it is my notes are terrible here. I'm racing to keep going. I'm working right almost up until the time of class. Specific emotions, it is very important to be able to feel them and to identify that we're having specific emotions. And another state further on is that we have to be able to learn to create specific emotions. We have to take the raw stuff of astrology and be creative. As time goes on in evolution, the specific emotions or the specific motivations will be less and less important to us. We will be overshadowing spiritual beings, and that we will have within our consciousness, we will be tutelary spirits for other beings that are developing. And that being the case, we don't want a specific desire for that solar system over there or something like that. The action is totally at that time internalized. And being totally internalized, we are alive with energy and feeling and such like that. And so the specificity of object-oriented desire becomes less and less as we become creative beings and we work in a greater sphere of activity. But as concomitant with that development where our consciousness is becoming greater and greater, we have to learn to experience the total emotional spectrum. Not only the archetypal, but all of the ones in between. I don't know how to say it. It's something like animals they help creatures to evolve into microenvironments where they take a principle that may be universal and they apply that in a very local, small way to the specific needs of that condition. And if we are going to be evolutionary beings, we have to be able also to, according to the evolutionary conditions, be able to work creatively with tracing emotions according to the need that is present at the time. Okay.
So creativity, is that considered activity, or what is creativity considered?
That's what we study in the last of the 4 sections. When we're all done with the emotionalities, and when we're all done with the mentalities, then we go into the spirituality, creativity, and individuality. Creativity is associated with the universal spirit, or with our focus in universal spirit. Behold, I make all things new is a statement that is made from the transcendent. And that's, all of the things that we work with are what we're studying now, the physical, the vitality, the emotions, and the thoughts, but the creativity, the newness that is engendered into this whole mechanism, if you want to call it, or this whole environment, that newness is of the spirit. It's not potentials. There are all kinds of potentials in the colors of the desire world. It's up to the individual to find a way to love in a particular way, or in a way to calm somebody else's feelings. And that's a creative activity. Okay. We've done just about here, haven't we, here? Well, this is what we're trying to do with astrology. It's something like, a horoscope is something like perceiving a cup full of water. And from that cup full of water, understanding all of water at the same time. Now, the reason I say water is because water has always been the major symbol for emotion and feeling. For this reason, when we look at a horoscope, the number of planets in water signs usually gives us some indication of the general feelability of the individual, or the general excitability, or the general emotionability. It isn't as strong as the moon in that, but it is a factor, such that if a person has a lot of planets in watery signs, like Herman Hess, that horoscope that we're working with, we'll see that it does become significant. So more of this will come out when we get the specific examples as we go through the 16 charts. Next time we will work with the chart of Jay Gould, and we'll do the same thing as we've been doing. You'll get a emotionality fact sheet, and you'll get an emotionality brief, and I'm going to try and do it again, that on the written level I'll do one thing, and then on the oral level do something that parallels, and then we have a two-track way. And it isn't boring, because anybody can read off of a sheet of paper. But not everybody can write a sheet of paper. How's the great American novel going?
Richard, what did you mean when you said that the blood colors?
Oh, that a person turns blue, for example, if they're starved of oxygen. By looking at the color of blood,
Oh my
you can
gosh,
tell
you remember the
the
date?
state of existence. You could tell.
Prime number.
What's the prime number?
Enough they can tell
Yep.
the white blood count.
Right, I know.
Blood,
Right.
blood is, you can look at it and see.
What about? I mean, I just don't think of it in those terms.
Someone who
said that,
is
I was
orange,
Yeah.
that's
Prime
very
number.
abnormal.
It is prime number.
That's very abnormal.
38 is not a prime number.
Someone showed me their blood was orange and said, this is really
I've
healthy.
been in a prime.
Here. No, is it freshly drawn blood?
Yeah.
I won't be. Next year.
It sounds really abnormal to me.
Everybody cares.
Yeah, we have to do it. I have to do it. I have money to make.
I want to eat chips though first.